Okay, now in this third version of the video, we are going to go back to where our robot draws a simple square. So I'm going to remove um, these blocks. So drive forward, then turn right, then drive forward, then turn right, then drive forward, then turn right, and finally, I am going to make it turn right 90 degrees. So I'm going to see what the robot does, and he should draw the perfect square and end up exactly as he started, okay? Now, as you can see, we have some code that can be recycled, or in other words, we can reuse the code using different tools. One of the tools is using a loop. Okay, so a loop, and let's talk about a loop. I'm just going to drag and put it on the side. A loop is just a function in computer science that allows you to iterate for a certain amount of time or do certain amount of iterations, okay, or repetitions. Now we're going to look at two different types of loops. One is the for loop that here it's called repeat until, and we're going to use the while loop. Now programmers use one or the other indistinctively depending on what they need, okay? You can always use a while loop or a for loop depending on what you need, okay? Okay, so let's start with the while loop. Let's say I am going to drag and drop a while loop. The while loop says that while the condition inside this while loop is true, then whatever it's inside that block, it's going to be processed, or the code is going to run. So let's say I have a while and I have a condition, and I'm going to use a true. Okay, so I'm going to go to operators, and I'm going to look for the true statement. Okay, let's go to here. Okay, so in order to make a true statement right here, I have to create a Boolean variable, just like we do it in Thinkable. So I'm going to go to my variables palette, and I'm going to make a Boolean, because that's the one that I need, and I'm going to call it flag, just because that's going to be the flag that tells me that it's true or false. So I'm going to click on submit, and now I have a variable called flag, and I can use this in my while, but before that, I need to set my flag to true, and then while the flag, so while it's true, I am going to do this. So in other words, what the program is going to do is that it's going to enter the while loop because this flag is true, the condition is met, and it's going to do this infinitely. Okay, so let's see if that happens. So the robot is going to start drawing, and then when it reaches the end of the code, the while loop will make it start all over again. Okay, so that's going to do it infinitely. There are many ways to get the robot out of that infinite loop, and one is creating a condition that will stop the robot going. Now, as you can see, the robot should do this 4 times. So the iterations, the number of iterations to do this is 4 times. So let's create a condition that makes the robot stop when it reaches 4 times. Okay, so I'm going to just take the flag out because I'm not going to need it anymore. And now I'm going to create a condition. So I'm going to create another variable, and this variable is going to be called iterations. Remember, you can call variables any name you want. Now I'm going to set iterations. Okay, I'm going to set iterations to 0 because that's going to be where I start. And what the condition that I'm going to meet is while iterations is less than 4, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, and 3. While iterations is less than 4, then do the conditions that are here. Otherwise, it will just jump out. So how can we do this? Okay, so I need to create the condition, so I'm going to go to the operators, and I'm going to say while iterations is less than 4, so I need the less than block, and I'm going to say that iterations, the variable iterations that is located either in variables, you can see the iterations variable is less than 4, then it's going to do this. Now the question is, if I run this code, the code is still going to be infinite. Because inside the while loop, there's absolutely nothing that makes iterations change. So if I click on play, I'm going to see that the robot is going to go continuously, and there's nothing inside that code that makes the robot stop. So that makes iterations change. So what I need to do is make my add a code where iterations is going to be added. Okay, so let's look at the iteration that, or the code that it's inside the while loop. As you can see, we have drive, turn, drive, turn, drive, turn. It's basically repeating, right? So what I want to do is that in this while loop, I only want to drive and turn, and it's going to be done 4 times. So let me get rid of this part, and this is what the code will be reduced. Okay, as you can see, creating a while loop or a loop will reduce the amount of code, and that is code reuse. So we talked about a variable iterations. Remember that we need to modify the variable iterations if we want to get to a point that the algorithm gets out of the while. So let's go to variables and let's see if we can modify that. Okay, so I'm gonna just set iterations to, and I'm gonna add 1 to iterations. So I'm gonna look for the operators, and I'm going to use the addition to add 1 to iterations. Okay, so in this case, just like we do in Thunkable, we're setting iterations to iterations plus 1 until it finishes. I'm gonna click on play, and let's see how the robot moves. So it's going once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and it should stop. As soon as iteration reaches 4, it goes out of the loop because it does not meet the condition. Remember, it starts at 0. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. Those are 4 iterations that I need to process. Okay? Now, we're going to look at the same version, but using a for loop. So this time, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to try to develop exactly the same code or the same process using a for loop. The difference between a while loop and a for loop is that a while loop requires a truth statement, and you need a modifier inside in order to tell it when to finish. Now, a for loop will have the start and the finish right at the beginning. And in this case, for some people, it's a lot easier to use for loops. So I'm going to go to the control statement. And here, when I have the repeat, this will say it will repeat until. Until what? Until a certain condition is established. Okay? Okay. I'm going to move. Okay, this is the repeat until. So it will repeat until some condition is developed. But I see that there's another function right here that gives me the repeat, and it gives me right away how many times do I want this to be repeated. So in this case, I'm going to go and grab this code. As a matter of fact, I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to duplicate this code, and I'm going to put it right in. So instead of creating a while loop where I have to create a variable and all that, I just have the repeat of a sequence for a certain number of times. So in this case, I'm going to tell it to do it 4 times, and let's see if it does exactly the same. Okay, so in this case, I do not need to update the iterations. I don't need to update these iterations because I only need this to be repeated a certain number of times. So the job of a programmer is always to see what is the abstraction of the code. How can I reduce code by creating loops, by creating variables, by creating functions? And that way I can make the code a lot more efficient. So I have to look for those patterns in my code in order to reduce the amount of processing, of course, of the computer, but also to make the code a lot more efficient.